You probably recognize where you are in this trait. I mean, how much congruence do you need between what you think, what you feel, and what you say? Can people read your emotions in your face? Are you willing to alter your behavior to get something different from somebody else?
Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I'm your host, Baldi, and Geoffrey Tumlin,
Yellow.
my co-host.
Yellow.
And this episode is on why your boss always knows what you're thinking.
That's right.
And call to action. We have a newsletter, comes out quarterly, so we don't harass you. Sometimes has our insights.
So we don't have to write it all the time.
That's also true. It takes a lot of work. It includes like some of our insights from field, maybe some trends that we've seen.
Ripped from the headlines.
Maybe some books that we've read that we really like. It's just some useful management stuff in there.
Yeah.
If you're interested, link is definitely in the show notes. So sign up.
Sign up.
This episode is sponsored by The Uncertainty Playbook, written by myself and Geoffrey Tumlin. 14 strategies for work success in a chaotic world. It's now available on Amazon.com and all of our websites. Grab yourself a copy. All right, let's talk about one of our favorite personality traits.
Yep. I think is my top two favorite assessments. This one and Maximizer.
Maximizer is definitely number one.
That was our very first season 1, episode 1 on Maximizer. And now we're talking about self-monitoring, which is why your boss knows exactly what you're thinking. Self-monitoring measures you. It's by Mark Snyder. It's many, many decades old. It's almost as old as I am, but a very highly reliable and valid.
It's been used a lot in social network analysis, with the main findings being that people who are high self-monitors tend to be the people who make it to the center of networks. So they tend to be the people everybody turns to for work-related advice. They tend to rise in organizations.
Yeah, generally they're your social butterfly.
Your social
glue.
Butterfly, the social glue.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, companies don't put enough emphasis on that, or they don't see the value because it can just look like it's social. There's one study where basically new ownership came into this company and they fired one person. I think it was one person because they thought the person was spending not enough time doing actual work and doing too much time chit-chatting. And so they fired them and basically had mass exodus, and to the point where they had to bring in consultants to try to figure out what happened. The consultants were network analysis researchers.
Yes, I will say when she says network analysis, that is basically studying who talks to whom in organizations.
Or who you turn to for work
who you turn to for advice.
Or who you like. It can be a bunch of different questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and it returns basically pathways or a map. And at its center are the people who are most central. But it just basically means the people who more people in the company are talking to. So
they're more influential.
Yeah.
And so this company, they went through all the employment records, like the applications, and basically the person they fired was responsible for almost everybody getting a job in this particular company. And the chit chat that they didn't think had any value was actually social glue that kind of kept everyone bonded and together. And in the process of doing that, also probably shared a lot of knowledge about the company because they'd been there for a long time. And so every once in a while, it will bite you to be a high self-monitor because the leadership may not value it. They may not see it. They may value more of a team environment. And you can look like you're a little bit of a social climber sometimes when you're a high self-monitor because, you're changing with every situation. We call these people chameleons.
When we're happy with them. Politicians when we're not happy.
Well.
That's a high self-monitor. Trust me, I know. I'm a high self-monitor.
I know you are a high self-monitor.
You don't think that that's exactly what people say when they're happy? They say chameleon.
I don't think chameleon isn't all that I think that can go either way.
Not me. That's a compliment. I'll take that all day
I know.
long.
Well, that's all right because you're going to get called that. So I'm
That's-
glad
I'll
you
take
take
that all
it
day
as
long.
a compliment.
She's low, by the way. So it measures you on 3 dimensions. The first is whether you tend to be direct or indirect in your communication.
So I would describe that differently. So the 3 I have is whether or not you're reading the
Yeah.
social cues of the people around you. So that's like, do you have the ability to even read the social cues?
Yeah.
2, your willingness to actually adapt to the social
That's
cues, which
where
is
you're very
managing
low.
your own expression. That is where I am very low.
Very low.
Yes, that is what gets me on the low side.
Yeah.
And then the 3rd is like this willingness to basically play or act, take on different identities.
Yeah, and the 3 things that I usually pull out of the assessment are directness of communication, emotional expressiveness, meaning your emotions leak out of your face, you're easy to read, and then your filter is internal versus external, meaning you're asked a question, a low self-monitor answers internally from what's inside, whereas a high self-monitor says, why did I get asked this question? What do they need to hear right now?
I feel like that's baked into the cake in my measures.
Yeah, I think so. And again, for purposes of clarity, I'm a very high self-monitor, and you're mid-low or low. Cindy's a low self-monitor.
I'm a low self-monitor. Geoff basically would have had a perfect score, but he knew he was
lied.
getting a perfect score, so he lied on the last 2 questions.
Lied on the last 2. There's only
Which
25
is why
questions.
you should never let anybody know exactly why
By the
they're
way,
taking the questions that they're
That's
taking.
been studied. I will point out that high self-monitors like me, people think we lie more, but we deceive at the same rate as lows. So highs and lows deceive at the same rate, but people think highs are much more dishonest. Or they think they're more dishonest than lows. Maybe not much more.
Oh, they think you're more dishonest because they see you changing.
Shift around.
They see you shifting your identity depending on the situation. So
Yeah.
that I would say that much akin to the episode on authenticity, I will say that yes, your identity does shift from situation to situation, but the underlying thing that ties them all together, which is like really your core values, that's like the golden thread between all these identity shifts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. People tend to call high self-monitors like me, as Cindi mentioned earlier, chameleons or adaptable. But when they're mad at them, they call them politicians. And they don't mean it as a compliment. They mean it as, like, you just said this thing, but I heard you say the opposite 2 weeks ago. And what you and I are trying to bring forth in this discussion is there's a lot of instances where you're going to have to modify your behavior because your company, the team you're leading, is a moving target and it's changing. And for people like me, that's going to be easy because it's going with the grain. I was born this way. I didn't become this way in graduate school. And you were born a different way. You were born, in your instance, you weren't so terrible at reading the cues, but you never really cared about doing anything about it. And have had to work harder, I think, to adapt to situations and not just to try to impose your will on them.
Well, like, so I'm definitely a sole trader, right? So, you give me a job and this is one of the things that impacts career paths between high and low self-monitors. It is also in the research, is that you take a high self-monitor and they know like the knowledge map where like they know better because from talking to people, like who knows what.
Talk to this person about this.
Right. And because of that, they will often go, and so they won't sit there and struggle with a task that they don't necessarily know how to do. They will go and seek out those people. And so they get things done better sometimes because of that. At least they get it done faster. May or may not get it done better. Whereas a low self-monitor, you give me a task and I don't even think about going to somebody for it. Like, that's my task.
I got it.
I'm going to figure out how to do it. I have to force myself to seek out who I think might know the information.
So the reason you should care about this, if you're listening, is that I believe this is fairly evenly dispersed in the population. Although heaven knows,
I think it is.
I've seen a lot of lows lately.
I think it depends on also where you're looking at an organization. So usually we're looking at directors and C-suite, and you do tend to get more high self-monitors there.
Tell them why, Deller.
Well, for some of the reasons that we've already talked about. So, I mean, you have made more connections, you know the information, like the knowledge map of the organization better or the group better. You leverage that better to be able to get your own projects done. You're the person who other people are turning to when they need help, even if it's just to say, hey, this is who you should talk to. And so high self-monitors tend to stand out, and they're able to adapt to positions, especially boundary spanning positions, which are positions where like you're going like internal to external, like you're crossing that boundary.
Yeah.
So like a CEO is often a boundary spanner.
Yeah. They're outside of the organization, figuring out what's going on in the environment on different
and you can see
community.
And you can see why being able to sort of switch out identities seamlessly, depending on which group you're talking to, could be a huge benefit for people who are in positions where they're boundary spanning and going from like these different stakeholder groups.
Yes. Now you can be successful. You can be successful as either a high or low self-monitor.
Yes, but most likely you're going to have to do some compensating behavior.
Yeah, of course.
As a low self-monitor, like I have to remind myself when I'm taking too long to learn something, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm being an idiot. I need to go to YouTube. I need to see if YouTube has the answer for this. Or now I need to go seek out AI.
Right. Whereas somebody like me, just to exaggerate to make a point, that would be the first thing I would do when I was stuck. Where is the answer out there?
Yeah.
The answer doesn't have to be in here.
Right.
Because that's not, I'm accustomed to looking out there or externally for the answer to the environment.
Where I'm used to just figuring the thing out on my own and often fail to see that there's an external environment. So I've had to learn a compensating behavior on that front. And then I think one of the other important compensating behaviors is because I will just put myself in an office and just work, I actually schedule a time to just walk around and talk. So I would do it like every Wednesday after classes. I would just walk down the hall and see whose door was open and didn't look like they were busy and just wander in and talk, because otherwise I'd have no relationships.
Yeah. So I'll give people a summary. The reason we care is that this gets at how people fundamentally interact. Low self-monitors tend to be more direct. They tend to tell it like it is. And they tend to, when asked a question, they will answer. They have an answer.
It's very hard. So let me give an example for that. It's very hard to give an answer that you know isn't true. There's a part of you that sort of fights yourself. So it's very common in our culture to come up to somebody and say, hey, how you doing? And that, I know the social norms on that. I know it's just a script. I know the response is supposed to be, fine. I'm good. How are you? And you're doing that while you're still walking away from each other. But if I'm having a bad day, I have to force myself to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's a good way of like busting those scripts. That's probably a low self-monitor. Whereas a high self-monitor doesn't matter. I'm always asking, again, high self-monitor tend to be more indirect with their communication. There doesn't have to be a high correlation between what I think, what I feel, and what I say. Whereas I can think, to go back to your question about, I can think, look, I'm having a bad day. I can feel I'm having a bad day, but I can say things are great or it's all good. And I have no trouble doing that. Whereas a low self-monitor, Cindi just mentioned, they prefer a higher correlation.
Well, they want the balance. Think, feel, speak. Yep.
Yeah.
That they're all in alignment with each other.
Right. And I can't overstate how gigantic that is. Because high self-monitors can think that's a terrible idea. They can feel that's a terrible idea, but they can say, how interesting. And it's not a lot of effort to do that. Whereas a low self-monitor, it's going to be more difficult to say to an idea that you think and feel is terrible, how interesting. This is where you go down a fork in the road. And the low self-monitor has to be careful in instances where the stone cold truth doesn't help people. Like when
I'm always thinking about that.
Yeah.
Does this?
You are, but that is a learned behavior.
That is a learned behavior.
Of knowing this assessment for 20 years and knowing how behavior is largely instinctual with a little bit of lessons learned on top of it. And you're working very hard to put your lessons learned on top of it. And you probably recognize where you are in this trait. I mean, how much congruence do you need between what you think, what you feel, and what you say? Can people read your emotions in your face? Are you willing to alter your behavior to get something different from somebody else? When asked a question, does the answer come from inside of you, or do you pause and think about, why are they asking me? What do they need right now? I mean, in a lot of our work, we do group facilitation, which is where we're gathering groups of people. And I would say we both have learned to be pretty decent at it over time, but it's a lot easier for me. I'm a lot less tired at the end of the day doing that, because modifying my behavior to what's happening minute by minute and what each person's contribution to whatever topic we're trying to advance, that's not a lot of work. That's natural. It's going with the grain. That's high self-monitor behavior stuff. Whereas you are going with the grain when it's coaching and you're having to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. And that makes you a lot less exhausted than me. And so we do similar kind of work, but on the days when I have to tell a number of people, even though it's just, one-on-one, like that's not working and you're thinking about this wrong, that takes more effort for me. Whereas when you have to change your behavior a lot of times in a group to kind of keep something moving along, that takes a little more effort for you. And so there's, like any personality variable, there's going to be something that's very good for you, or else over time these things would extinguish themselves. But typically a trait that survives confers some kind of advantage, and then there will often be something you need to watch out for. So the low self-monitor, people think the lows are very loyal. They think that they're more honest, and they like being able to read the way you're feeling. And they like that sense of, well, I'm getting it straight from this person. What you have to watch out for is, as you mentioned, carrying too rigid of a behavior into very different situations. And then the high self-monitor, not all, but a lot of high self-monitors have learned how to be that social butterfly, to be that glue in an organization, to be, indispensable isn't quite the right word, but to be a very important social component of an organization or a group or a team. The thing that we have to watch out for is that we're not going around too often telling people what they want to hear when we should be telling them what they need to hear.
Yes. And both of them can either, like highs and lows, can either modify and go against type, because it's just a personality trait. So
yeah, it's not a handcuff.
Right. You don't have to stick to it.
Yeah, it's just like being an introvert and speaking up more.
Right. And so you can go against type. It is helpful to know what the type is, so you know what you're looking for and how it might impact you. And so that's part of the reason to have this conversation. Whatever you land on, you have benefits and you have a disadvantage, and you can go against that type to sort of help overcome that. But yeah, there are going to be situations that are more taxing for you.
Yeah. And why we said your boss knows what you're thinking, that's if you're a low self-monitor, because it's going to be very hard for you to cover that up. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be someone who's struggling if what you think and feel is different than what you're trying to say. It's going to take a little more effort. And some of that pain, if you will, may leak out in your nonverbal cues and the way your facial expressions are. Your boss, your significant other, your coworkers may be able to pick up on that and know what you're actually feeling, even if you're trying to cover it up. Whereas you have a much harder time with the high self-monitor who chooses to kind of cover that up.
Yeah. And then there's one other thing that I think is really important for managers to know, and it's an advantage for high self-monitors again. So it goes back to this idea that the high self-monitor has a better idea of the knowledge between people in an organization. Who knows what, who has what skills.
Right.
And so, and this is where the loyalty comes into play. This is why high self-monitors are not considered or perceived to be as loyal as low self-monitors, is that the high self-monitor will choose the person who has the skills that is best suited to the task.
Right.
Whereas a low self-monitor, partly, at least in part, because we don't have that knowledge map.
Yeah.
We're doing, a little substitution error.
Yeah.
Where we like this person.
Yeah, very
we see
interesting.
them good at everything. Yeah. And so we just pick them and we apply them to everywhere. So I've had examples of that really stand out to me. One of them, my friend Lisa, when we were growing up, she's good at every sport. I put her to work in the snack bar.
Families drive-in.
Yeah, in the drive-in.
Movie theater. Yeah.
And, was very personable. Like everything I ever saw Lisa do, I thought was great. And so anyway, I gave her the job of projectionist, which in a movie theater was historically the most expensive job.
Highest paying.
And I did that because I had no reason to think that Lisa wouldn't be good at that. And I think she was there like 2 weeks doing it and then came to me and was like, I can't do it. I'm here till 2 a.m. by myself, jumping cars. Like I'm a wreck with the pressure of having to have the movies on me if something breaks. I'm a wreck about having to be here late into the night by myself.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And that was one of the experiences where I was like, oh yeah, I can see that.
And you just plugged her in because she had been great before.
I considered her great at everything. And so why wouldn't she be great at that?
Yeah. So you're saying you think a low self-monitor is more likely to make that
yes
domain expertise error.
Yes.
That's interesting.
And I think that's why they get perceived as being more loyal, because they have a smaller group of people that they're working with, and then they're plugging them into everything. Yeah,
we just had that at a place we work. Basically, a job came open, and it's very competitive because everybody wants to be a part of this company. And I met with the boss, and the boss has basically said, I'm picking this internal person because she's waited for years. And there's no discussion about, there's probably would be 10 amazing people applying for this job, but it didn't matter.
Right.
And they picked that internal. I mean, it was the choice was with the supervisor, and the supervisor picked the internal person, and there was never any serious consideration of anybody else, which sounds like
a low
self-monitor move. Yeah.
Yes. And you will do that. Maybe this podcast helps you learn faster, but you will do that until you realize you're making, not the best choices.
Yeah.
Which causes its own pain.
Right. Not that we're saying you shouldn't hire from the inside.
No,
I think our leaning is that you should.
Yes.
Because of
but you should hire
the best person.
The best person from the inside.
Right.
And if there's truly a better person from the outside, then you hire them.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. One of the companies that we're in has a lot of low self-monitors, and I have now surveyed virtually the whole organization. And it's interesting because I'm not really sure why. They're probably 70% low, 30% high. And as you've said before, of that 30% high, a disproportionate number is in the higher ranks. Again, doesn't mean you can't be in the higher ranks if you're a low self-monitor. That's not the case at all. It's just that adaptable that naturally adaptable behavior probably confers a little bit of an advantage in some of those roles. Not that we couldn't just list one after the other very successful chief executives who were probably low self-monitors, but how you get a lot of one kind or another is often a hiring bias.
Well, it's also cultural. So
Could be.
if the organization
Values, straight talk.
values straight talk, which we've had a fire department like that.
Yeah, I remember.
Mhm. And where they were definitely,
They were also argumentative.
yes, but they were also definitely low self-monitors too.
For sure.
And
And they were very good.
they were very good, but you can also have a culture where self-monitoring doesn't go over so well in like a very peer-based team environment, because the high self-monitor is distinguishing themselves from the group that they're supposed to be equal to.
And how does a high self-monitor distinguish themselves in a group?
I mean, there's a lot of status that's conferred with the high self-monitoring, right?
Yeah, that you're one of the things that distinguishes you is you're not just a part of the small group, you're also connected outside of the group into other organizations.
Yeah, and depending on the organization and how much emphasis they have sort of at like this non-hierarchical group setting structure,
Yeah.
the high self-monitor is not going to be as likely to rise.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. I find the assessment itself to be very informative whenever we've done it in groups, because people kind of immediately get that they have a leaning one way or the other. And then it starts explaining communication struggles in many cases, because you're like, as an example, that organization that we were in that had so many low self-monitors, it's a healthcare organization. And so as soon as we had that measure, people started basically saying, look, I wonder if this explains why we often have patient complaints that we were rude. Because, people are very sensitive about their health. And if you're a low self-monitor,
It's a vulnerable time.
Yeah. If you're a low self-monitor, again, you're not trying to be mean, but you may say something, like you may actually answer a question. Why somebody is upset that they've been waiting in the ER, and they ask the registration clerk, who's, let's say, a low self-monitor.
Yes, they may get more of an answer that's true.
Yeah. Why
but
am I
still
waiting so
aggravating.
long? Why am I waiting so long? Well, because your condition isn't a priority right now.
Right.
And that is absolutely true. But
that does not make somebody feel real warm and fuzzy towards you.
Right. Yeah. It takes a low self-monitor a little bit of time to learn to undo that.
Well, and especially if they're a low self-monitor that doesn't read social cues very well, because I would consider generally the truth to be the respectful answer. And
spoken like a true low self-monitor.
Yeah, I know. And so, I don't see my answer as a problem internally. And if I'm not reading social cues, I'll never learn that maybe sometimes it is.
Yeah. 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 So, as with any personality variable that we may talk about, or any assessment that's measuring a personality variable, just because you tend to be lower or higher, it doesn't prevent you from doing anything you want with your life. But it does shed light on where you're going to have a little momentum and where you're going to have to work a little bit harder to overcome something. We had a leader at a kind of a junior level who was very low self-monitor rise to a very senior position. And we coached this person and told him all along the way, you haven't yet had big consequences for speaking your mind. And so you've been able to go with the grain. But this next promotion, you're now in the orbit of basically your bosses are all politicians. And there's a lot of politicians who are high self-monitors, and they're not going to take kindly to always getting the unfiltered answer. And sure enough, he's had to work very hard to restrain the behaviors that work very well until they didn't. And I'll use myself. It's not just lows that have to do that. Highs have to do that as well. I mean, I had many, many years of basically using my communication to make people feel good and to largely tell people what they wanted to hear in the situation. And then I look up one day and we have a company where we're doing executive coaching. And if you can't tell people what they need to hear in coaching, you're a terrible coach. You're not a coach, you're a cheerleader. Those are completely different roles. And I basically realized, like, I'm going to have to increasingly use this less natural skill. And I'm going to have to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear, after a lifetime of going with the grain. We say a version of this probably every fourth or fifth podcast. The higher you go as a manager, the more you have to be good at more and more things. If you're a brand new manager or you're early in the start of your career, you may be in a place surrounded by other low self-monitors and everybody speaks their mind, and it's not a detriment to you today. But you will not always be in this job with these coworkers.
Well, and as you get higher, the more you shift into like the boundary spanning jobs.
Yeah, sure.
The more you're going to have to shift out of the low self-monitoring.
Yeah. And you'll need more of that.
And the more people you are managing, you're going to have to shift back and forth continuously.
Right. Because you have to also be able to tell people, no, and not this, that. That's not a good idea. We're going to do this instead. We've talked enough. I'm the shot caller. I'm calling the shot. That is a low self-monitor kind of behavior that high self-monitors are going to have to use increasingly as they rise in organization, just as the opposite is also true for the behaviors.
Anyway, thanks for joining us today. And we will see you next time. Always, we appreciate the likes and so forth. So if you got it in you,
do it.
Like us, subscribe, get your notifications.
Do it.
Appreciate it. Next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Sarah and Rebecca. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.